Alright, so today we're going to see how the Samsung S22 Ultra stacks up against the iPhone 13 Pro Max in terms of photo and video. So the S22 Ultra has a quadruple camera setup with a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 108 megapixel wide camera, a 10 megapixel telephoto, as well as a 10 megapixel super telephoto. On top of that, you're also getting a 40 megapixel front-facing camera. As far as video, you have 4K up to 60 frames per second, and you also have the option to shoot 8K 24 frames per second. But for this video, we're going to keep things limited to 4K. The iPhone 13 Pro Max has a triple camera setup with a 12 megapixel ultra wide, a 12 megapixel wide, and a 12 megapixel telephoto. You're also getting a 12 megapixel front-facing camera. As far as video, you also have 4K up to 60 frames per second. So let's start off with some video from the front-facing cameras. So personally, I think I lean towards the 13 Pro Max here. I think my skin tone looks a bit more true to life, and I think the overall image quality is a tad bit sharper. As far as the cinematic mode versus the portrait mode, pretty much the same result. Although you do have a few more options with the portrait mode on the S22. If you're familiar with Samsung phones, then I'm sure you've seen these different effects before. A few photo examples using the front-facing cameras in portrait mode. Again, I think I lean towards the 13 Pro Max. I think my skin and just my face in general looks a bit more true to life. So here we have some video from the main cameras, 4K 60 frames per second, and I think they're both giving you a really great image. But I will say that the 13 Pro Max does appear to be slightly sharper, and I also think it performs a tad bit better in terms of stabilization. All of the footage that you're seeing was shot using the standard stabilization on both phones. On the S22 Ultra, you do have the option to use Super Steady, which is a more intense level of stabilization, but it will drop the video down to 1080p instead of 4K. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some photos. So as far as the ultra wide cameras, not really a huge difference between the two. They're both giving you 12 megapixels. So in terms of resolution, neither is going to give you a big advantage. But I will say that I prefer the colors on the S22, specifically the blues. They just look more vibrant and give the image a little bit more life. As far as the wide angle cameras, this is where you are going to get an advantage in terms of resolution on the S22 Ultra. Like I mentioned, you are getting 108 megapixels compared to the 12 megapixels on the 13 Pro Max. So you can see if we crop into this image at 600%, the image on the S22 Ultra holds up quite a bit better. As far as the telephoto cameras, you're actually getting a slight advantage on the 13 Pro Max with the 12 megapixels versus the 10 megapixels on the S22 Ultra. But that doesn't last very long because you also have that super telephoto camera on the S22 Ultra, which allows you to punch in even more while retaining a ton of clarity and detail. So with that super telephoto camera on the S22 Ultra, you're getting an impressive 100 times zoom ability, which gives you a lot of flexibility as far as capturing subjects from a distance. So for example, we have this building in the distance there with some wording towards the top. With the zoom ability of the S22 Ultra, we can zoom all the way into the individual letters of that word. Whereas on the 13 Pro Max, we're capped out at 30 times zoom, so we're still able to get pretty close, but not quite on the level of the S22 Ultra. So here we have another example, similar scenario. We have a building in the distance with some wording towards the top. And again, we're able to zoom all the way into the actual letters of the word with the S22 Ultra. Now, as you can see, the image isn't perfect, but having the ability to zoom in this far is definitely impressive. And there is some pretty solid post-processing that takes place to give you an image that's relatively usable. Now let's go ahead and switch things over to nighttime. So right here, we're using the main cameras, 4K 60 frames per second. And what I didn't realize as I was shooting this video is that I was getting quite a bit of reflections on the 13 Pro Max. All the different lights that were around was causing some issues, But aside from that, again, I do think that we get a slightly sharper image on the 13 Pro Max, as well as slightly better stabilization, which I mentioned earlier. I do think the S22 Ultra is also giving you some really great video, and it is interesting that I had the issues with reflections on the 13 Pro Max, but not the S22 Ultra. Now, in terms of nighttime photography, this is where I personally lean towards the S22 Ultra. I think in terms of dynamic range, it does a great job. It keeps the shadows nice and dark while still maintaining the highlights very well. And I think that's the main thing that I noticed in terms of nighttime photos between these two. The S22 Ultra just seemed to do better at exposing highlights. So as far as photo, aside from the front-facing camera, I would go with the S22 Ultra. And as far as video, I would give the edge to the iPhone 13 Pro Max. But like I always say in these videos, it comes down to personal preference and what looks best to you. So I'm curious to know which one you guys think performed the best. So if you found this video to be helpful, do me a favor, give it a thumbs up as well as subscribe to the channel. You can also follow me on social media to stay up to date on all my latest content. So I appreciate you guys watching this video as well as all the others. And aside from that, as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.